In Module 4, we'll be talking about using Power Query to transform your data. We'll be doing several different types of transforms and several different end-to-end examples in this module, but we'll be talking about some of the types of filters and transformations that you can do. So we'll talk about sorting and filtering, and really the overall mechanism for organizing your data for reporting, and then how to apply those transforms just using the user interface at this point. We will later on in this class talk about how you can use the mQuery language without the user interface to create transformations. So when we talk about transformations, within the context of the overall spectrum of what you're doing with Power Query, this is that refine step that we've talked about. So you're going to be actually refining the results and getting them to a point where you can eventually bring them into a report. So that's the big refine step here. Now, some of the ways that you can do that refining is through some basic sorting and filtering. And the reason I kind of pull these aside as separate transforms to talk about is because these are very simple and they already work the same way that they do in Excel. So you'll find a lot of these things that we're going to look at are similar to traditional Excel transformations of the data, like filtering and sorting. But there's some more complicated transforms that you can do as well through the user interface, and I have some of them listed here. Things like removing columns, make the first row your headers, uppercase, lowercase, trim the data, fill down. There's some really interesting ones in here like group by as well. Unpivot is a very popular one you'll find yourself using quite a bit. So there's quite a few in here, and rather than just describing each of them listed here, I wanted to give you a list, but rather than just describing each of them, I'd like to actually show you how these work. So what we're going to do here next is go through several end-to-end examples of some common transformations that you'll need to know how to use inside of Power Query. All right, so in this demonstration, we're going to look at 3 independent examples here and show you a couple different types of transforms that you can apply. We'll end with a fairly complex one, but let's start with a basic one here and kind of work our way towards that. The first example that I want to show you guys is pulling in data from multiple files. We talked earlier about the From Folder option. Let's take a look at how that would work in this demonstration. So I'm going to start by going up to the Power Query tab. And inside the Power Query tab, we're going to go to the From File section here, and we're going to pull in from the folder. So we'll select From Folder here. And then we'll be prompted to select where the folder is. So we'll define the path. So I'll hit Browse here. And you'll find inside the class files, if you go find wherever you've saved your class files, you'll be able to find that path fairly quickly. So mine is under my C drive, under Power Query, and it's going to be under Instructor Notes, and Excel Module 4. And I have a folder here called File Folder Example. That's the one I need for this, so I'll select that. So your path should look something like this for this example. But all the files that are necessary for this example are in the Instructor Notes folder. If you go to that folder and you look under Excel, you'll find in Module 4 the file folder that we're looking for. All right, so I'll hit OK, I'll select that. It's going to pull in the files that I have from that folder, and it will list all the files here for me. Now, what we're going to show you in this example is what's called a binary combine, where we're actually combining multiple files together based on the binary data. So if you look at this, you'll see that it's listing all 3 of the files that we have in here. They're called File 1, File 2, File 3. And what I'd like to do is I want to actually bring the content for all 3 of those files together. Now, if I want to do that, you'll see there's an option here where you can actually expand on the content. That's one way of doing it. The other way is you can also hit the Combine Binaries in the Combine section. Either way, we'll do the same thing. And basically, it's merging all the data from these files together. So if I click on Combine Binaries, you'll see that data now merged together here into a single file. Now, a couple things that we'll want to do to fix this data up. You'll notice a couple things that look kind of odd about the data. First of all, you'll notice the column headers are repeated a couple times. You'll see name, state, name, state, name, state repeated several times in here. So I'll want to do a few things to fix this data first. So to do that, we'll start by telling it that the first row of the data is our column headers, which you'll see there's a transform for up in the top ribbon here underneath the home ribbon. You'll see there's a use first row as column headers option. Go ahead and select that. Now that will push up that first row of the data up into the header section, and then we can do some other things if we want to fix this. You'll still note that we see the repeating column headers inside of the file. So if we want to remove that, you could simply do a filter, say for example on the name column, and anytime you see the name called name, you can unfilter that. Remember I told you filtering here is very similar to how it is in Excel. There's an example of it right there. So I'll select the name header, hit the down arrow, and I'll uncheck name to filter that out, and then I should be left with just the data here. Okay, looks good. Now, I probably want to make sure I go ahead and rename this. It's very, very important that you rename each of these queries. Otherwise, you'll have them called Query 1, Query 2, Query 3, that so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and rename that. And then let's call this our from file option or from folder option. Example, how about that? From folder example. Now, one thing that's really interesting to note here is the way the Power Query works is every time you apply one of these transformations, when I told it that the first row had my headers in it, or I combined the data, everything is recorded as a step in this applied step section. So every single thing that we've done in here can be viewed as an individual step. So if I work my way back, if I go back to promoted headers and click on that, you'll see that it goes back to the previous step where before I had actually removed out the filter. Or if I go back to the change type, that was a change data type that was automatically done by Power Query. I can go all the way back to the very beginning and see what we started with and see what the different individual components are that went through as we apply these transforms to the data. So really cool that it shows you all those. And the nice thing about that is if you ever need to make a change to it or delete one, you can come over to the applied step section and you can always delete a step here. So they make it very easy for you to fix things. All right, so again, we're going to make sure this is called from folder example. To new S, and then hit close and load to pull that data in. All right, so that's our first example. We showed there the use first row as headers. We showed some filtering. We also showed the combined binaries there. Let's go do another example here. This time, what I'm going to have you do is open up a web browser, and I have my web browser open right here. And the website I'd like you to go to is one called explorer.data.gov. You can see it on my screen here, explorer.data.gov. This is data.gov, a ton of different government public data sets out here for the US government. Go ahead and go to that website, and it probably will likely redirect you to catalog.data.gov. And what I'd like you to do here is search through the different data sets that are available. And the data set that I'd like you to search for is one called FDIC failed banks. So search for FDIC failed banks. Okay, and hit enter. And you should get 12 results returned back, or at least at the time of me recording this, there's 12 data sets that are returned back. And the one that I'd like to use for our next example is this one here called FDIC failed bank list. Go ahead and select that, left click on it. And you'll see that there's actually a file that we can download. Now the neat thing about how this works with Power Query is I can leave the file out on this website, never download it, just point to the file and use the file directly from the web. So that way, anytime there's new updates that are added to that file, all I have to do is hit refresh inside of Power Query and I get the latest version of it. Here's how you can do that. Again, I don't want to download it, but what I can do is get the link where the download file is located. So if I right click on this download button here and select copy link address, or depending on what your web browser calls it, it may be called copy shortcut, but I'm going to select copy link address in Chrome here. And I'm going to take that link address back over to Power Query. So go back over to Excel. And I'm going to go to the Power Query tab at the top. Okay. And I'm going to select the From Web option this time because we're pulling data from the web. So I'll select From Web. And I'll paste in the URL that we just copied. Now you'll notice here that it's a banklist.csv file. So that's the kind of file that we want to completely import into Power Query, and anytime I hit refresh, it's going to go call back out to that file. It's never downloading it, it's leaving it out there, so that way I can always get the latest version of the data without re-downloading. Alright, so I'll hit OK, and it's going to pull this data into the Power Query editor. Again, I've done this before, so I have to hit the little refresh button up here because it has the results cached. And what I can find in here is it has quite a bit as far as results for me for failed banks. Now what I'd like to do is I only care about a few of the columns here. So I'm going to take out the columns I don't care about. So the ones I don't really care about this time are the cert column, the acquiring bank, and let's say the update date. If I don't care about those columns, I could select those three, right click on them and tell it to remove those columns, the very top option here when you right click, and it just leaves me with the columns that I do care about. Now the other thing I can do here as well is if I say for example it's nice that I have the exact date on when these banks were closed, but really I just care about it at a year level. So if I wanted to, I could change this because it's already a date data type. And by the way, here's how you can tell. If I select the closing date column, you can see up in the top ribbon that the data type is a date. So because it's a date data type, I have a set of special transforms that I can apply to it based on the data type. Here's how you do that. You right click on the column header and you go down to transform. Underneath the Transform contextual menu, you'll find that there's several different types of transforms at the top, but towards the bottom there's ones that are more applicable towards dates, including this one here that allows me to convert this date to a year. So I can roll these values up to a year level if I select year here. Now it just converts that date into a year, so as I bring this into a report, it'll be easier now to look at everything by year instead of individual dates if I wanted to. Now, of course, we've already removed some columns we don't really think are necessary, but again, it's very important that I go ahead and rename this query. You don't want to call it query 1, query 2. Let's call this one failed banks. Okay, so I've named this query, and now I'm ready to go ahead and pull this into Excel. I'll hit close and load again to bring the results into Excel. And you can see over here in the workbook queries pane, we have 539 rows here. And so I'm happy with that. We'll take that, and let's say we want to put this into a report. So if I want to put this in a report and say, for example, I want to know which state had the most failed banks, I can go and insert this by going up to the Insert menu and say Insert into Power View. It's just a reporting tool. Again, Power View is only available in Excel 2013, but you could easily do this in an Excel pivot table as well. But I want to take this data, I want to bring it into Power View, and what I'd like to do is I want to see which state had the most failed banks. Now, Power View automatically just puts this into a table for me, but what I'd like to do instead of just doing a table is I want to see this into some kind of like a bar chart. So I'm going to take out some of this data that I have here. I'm going to take out the closing date for a moment. I'm going to take out the city, and I have bank name in here. What I'd like to do is I'm going to do a count on the bank name. So in the bottom right here where the fields list is, I'm going to hit the down arrow on bank name and change it to a count of the non-blank values. And by the way, you can move these around. If you don't like the order that these appear, I can take the bank name, the count of bank name, and move it to the bottom if I want to see it like this. That's fine. But I really want to convert this to a bar chart. So I'm going to select a bar chart up here on the top and make it a stack bar. Now when I do that, it's going to convert this table into a bar chart. I can resize it here a little bit by making it a little larger. And now that it's a little larger, I can also resort this. You can see up at the top here, I can change the sort order. Right now it's sorting by state. Let's change that and sort by, instead, the count of failed banks descending. And you can see Georgia, Florida, Illinois were my top 3 as far as failed bank states. I could also bring into this, if I wanted to, I could bring the closing date into the legend section, and I can see by year where my failed banks are occurring. So most of the failed banks, it looks like, were in the 2009, 2010, 2011 timeframe here. Okay? That's all Power View, but it's a nice little way to look at the data. Now, if I also wanted to, I could make this into a map. So let's make this into a map here. And I'm looking at this map, and I'm going to bring this and take out the year for a moment. And I'm going to bring the state up into the location section here. Right now, I have a map for each state, but I don't really want that. I'd rather see this as the location. And if I bring this into the location, we should see each of the states listed out here, including how Hawaii has some, and some looks like some territories as well. But I'm going to bring in city as a nested value in the location section here. So I have state and city nested together. And what this allows me to do now is if I look at this report, I can go look at a certain state. For example, I saw Georgia was my worst failing state for failed banks. So if I wanted to see that by city now, I can double click on the state name, and it'll show me each of the cities where I have those failed banks, which is pretty neat. I can always drill back up. There's a little drill up button up at the top here. If I select drill up, it'll take me back to the full view of the map. Okay, so again, this is Power View integrated in with the rest of our solution, but it shows you how quickly you can go from no data to having data and then actually presenting it very quickly. Let's do one more example here. And in this last example, again, I'm going to have you go back to your web browser. And in this web browser, what I'd like you to search this time is I want you to go to the website called QuickFacts. Okay, so go to QuickFacts. There it is, quickfacts.census.gov. So again, it's government data, U.S. government data for census data. Well, let's go ahead and go to quickfacts.census.gov. And when you go to that website, I also want you to click on the U.S. QuickFacts link right here. Okay, so select that. And then when you select U.S. QuickFacts, scroll down to the bottom, you'll see there's a lot of little facts that are integrated on the website. But if you want to download the full data set, you'll see there's a link towards the bottom of the page that says download the full data set. Go ahead and select that. All right, now once we get this, we're actually going to use this website a couple times, so you'll keep this open for some later examples. But to finish this module off, we're going to look at one example of a more complex data set here that we want to fix. And that data set is this one in here called Phipps County Name. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and right-click on Phipps County Name. Okay, so right-click on that. And you're going to select the copy link address here again. So copy the link address to the Phipps County Name. Okay. Now we're going to go take that back into Power Query. So go back to Power Query. okay, or go back to Excel and go back to the Power Query window. So I'll go select Power Query at the top of the ribbon and select From Web again, just like we did in the last example. I'll paste this URL in that we just copied, okay, and you can see it is the URL to the text file that we just found, and I'll hit OK. Now when I hit OK, it's going to launch us inside the Power Query editor. I'm going to hit refresh again. Again, you won't see that refresh likely, but there's a couple things here that I want to fix with this data. There's a lot going on in here, but probably the best thing again would be to do is to start off by renaming the query. So let's rename this. This looks like county data. It's going to show us census data by county, so let me go ahead and rename that to county. Okay. All right, so now that I have that, let's look at some things that we can do with this data. The first thing I'd like to do is let's go ahead and remove this change data type that it's doing. It looks like in this case, Power Query has made some assumptions about our data. It looked at the data, for example, this column 1, and it made an assumption that that's an integer, but in fact, it's actually supposed to be a string because there's some leading zeros in here. So it trimmed off those leading zeros when it changed the data type. So I want to kill that change type step here. Go ahead and do that with me. I'll kill the change type step, and you'll see the results when you hit the X on that is it'll give you back those leading zeros. It left aligns it. If it's left aligned, it's got to be text here. So it's done a few things there for us, but we definitely want to undo that change data type because that's not right. The next thing I'd like to do though is I want to split up the county name and the state here. So you'll see here there's the county name and then the state abbreviation right next to it. I want to split that into two separate columns. So the way to do that, or one of the ways I can do that, is I can select the column, I can go up to the Transform tab, and you'll see there's a split column transform here. I'm going to go ahead and select split column. And we're going to split this column by a delimiter. So we'll select by delimiter, and it's going to be a delimiter of a comma, which is already the default, at the rightmost portion of the delimiter. And you probably could choose any of these because I think we only have one comma that goes all the way down here. But I'm going to select the rightmost for the comma delimiter that we're going to use, and I'll hit OK. Now what it's going to do is it's going to split that off into two columns. You'll notice again that the column 1, the change data type, had occurred again, so you'll want to kill that change type yet again. But you'll see that we have the county name separated out from the state abbreviation here, and we can really kind of play around with this a little bit more. Maybe there's a few other things that we want to do in here. First of all, I definitely know that the United States is not a county, so let's go ahead and filter out the United States here. Remember how you can filter out data from a column? You hit the down arrow, and you would select that you want to filter out United States. Now you can scroll down all the way if you wanted to, or you can type United States here, and then you can just uncheck it. Okay, so I'll type in United States, uncheck that I want to filter that out, and now it's filtered out the United States value that was inside that column. Now the other thing I'd like to do here is I want to extend out the fully spelled column name. And I have this state abbreviation, which is okay, but let's say, for example, let's make things interesting. Let's say I have a requirement that the state name be fully spelled out like I see it is right here. And if I scroll down a little bit more and I find the next state, you'll see that the next state is also fully spelled out, Alaska here. And I want to make that its own column. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to go up to the Add Column ribbon, portion of the ribbon, and we're going to select that we want to add a custom column here. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to write a little bit of an mQuery, but it's going to be pretty basic. It's going to be a little if statement. Now, one thing I'll tell you about mQuery is that it is case sensitive. So you want to type this exactly like I do as you do this. So we're going to do an if, and I'm going to say if column 2, okay, so basically what I'm going to say here is if the column 2 value is null, I want to bring across the fully spelled out column name, the fully spelled out state name, I mean. Okay, so I'm going to bring in if column 2 is null, so if the value of the state abbreviation is null, then I want to see the column 1, column 2.1 I mean. So I'll select column 2.1 and then I'll say return back that value if column 2.2 is null, else don't do anything, else do null. Okay, so let's check out what this is going to look like. If I hit OK, it's going to create a brand new column where it's really isolated out the state name, the fully spelled out state name, and it has null values all the way down from there on out. Now the cool thing about what Power Query does for you is it has some really, really neat transformations, including one in here that'll really help us with this called fill down. The way fill down will work is it will replace all these null values with the first value until it sees a change. So what that means is it'll replace all these null values with Alabama fully spelled out until it sees Alaska. And when it sees Alaska, then it'll start filling down with Alaska. So here's how fill down works. If you go to the Transform tab, you'll see there's an option here called Fill. And you'll want to hit the down arrow on it, and you'll see there's both a fill down and a fill up. In this case, we want to do a fill down to take all the values and bring them down. And you can see here, it looks like it worked properly. We can see Alabama all the way down until it changes to Alaska, and it has Alaska all the way down. So that looks like it's properly working. Now what we can do to clean this up a little bit more is we can tell it that we want to filter out the null values on this column to get rid of that one row here that has the state in it, because I really just want to bring back the counties. Remember, I named it county. So I want to filter out all the null values here by hitting the down arrow and unfiltering or unchecking the null value. All right, so now we got a real good list here of all of the counties and what state they came from. Now, a couple other things we can do in here. If I wanted to, I could say, well, I don't want this text to all be capitalized. So what I could do is I could change this so that it's all proper casing, traditional casing for this column. To do that, the easiest way is I could right-click on the column name here and go down to where it says transform, and you'll see there's a transform here called capitalize each word. And if I select that, you'll see it'll case it properly like you're used to seeing. All right, great. So we've got each of those things taken care of. The next thing is probably what makes sense to do here is I could rename some of these columns. Let's go ahead and ditch this column 2.2. I don't care to have the state abbreviation. I have the fully spelled out state now. So I'll right click on this. I'll remove that column if I wanted to. And I'll go ahead and rename some of these columns. Let's call this one FIPS, which is an abbreviation they use for the census code for the county. Let's also call this one our county column. And let's call this last column state. Okay, so with those transforms complete, again, make sure there's no other change types in here on the FIPS column. It looks like it should be good to go here. One last thing I want to make sure you guys do is also do a trim on this column. There's potentially some data in here that has some trailing spaces, so let's make sure we take care of that by right-clicking on the FIPS column and telling it that we want to transform and trim out any values that might be trailing spaces at the end of this. So I'm going to right-click and do transform trim on the FIPS column. And then now we've trimmed out all the extra spaces that are at the end of this. That's going to help us a little bit later when we have to use the results of this in a new query as well. All right, so go ahead and hit close and load once you have that. It's going to take the results, bring that into an Excel table, and we've got that one taken care of. So in this module, what we looked at was several different examples of end-to-end Power Query solutions where we used transforms to actually refine the data that we pulled in. And the next module, what we're going to look at is how we can combine some of the results of different queries into a single result set. And what I'd like you to do is actually hold on to the results of this very last one that we did, this county query that we created, and we're going to use that and the results of it as part of the examples that we're going to use in the next demonstrations.